Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Specialist podcast. I'm here with John. I'm McKenna, and we are going to rewind season 46, episode 6.
Yeah. McKenna, how'd you feel about this episode?
I thought it was a great episode of Survivor. I was entertained while watching it, but it was very tricky for us after the podcast to try and think of what we wanted to say, because I feel like Survivor is feeling newer and fresher and not as old school, where we find ourselves wanting to reference new era things, but we don't want to do that quite yet.
Yeah, we do have to put like a bit of a statute of limitation on how recent seasons of Survivor we can reference at this point on the rewind, especially because we started podcasting the rewind 2 seasons ago. So you don't want us referring back to season 44 when you've already heard us talk about those moments in relation to season 44. You don't need to hear us comparing things to season 46 that way. Yeah. But this episode still, despite having a lot of those things we've come to know from the new era, boat arrives, hey, get on this boat, you have 10 minutes, get your stuff, we're taking you to one of the beaches. I kind of miss the times when we used to go to a brand new beach for these merges, but it's fine. I get it. I get how it is in Fiji. I understand. And we have like the Mergatory thing, which is of course only a new era thing, but there are still moments in this episode that really do give us a feeling for older seasons of Survivor. And unfortunately, like the one that everyone seems to be saying all over the internet is that Nami is so much like Tambira. They didn't go to tribal before the merge, and because of that they're kind of falling apart and kind of just want to take shots at each other. But McKenna, we already compared Nami to Tambira.
We did last week over on the Patreon, and last week on the rewind we talked a little bit about Tocantins. But before we go on, John, I'm pretty sure we have to remind them to subscribe, please. We're so close to hitting a milestone. Unless we've already hit it, I don't know. We need like 5.
We're almost at 10,500. We love a few more subscriptions, because once we get to 10,500, we can get to 11,000, and so on and so forth.
So please like, subscribe, do all the things that you're supposed to do over on YouTube.
So McKenna, just looking at the landscape of season 46 right now, where do you think this season's going?
I don't know. I feel like anytime I predict anything with Survivor, this is why I don't play the predictions and power rankings game, but you should become patron so you're able to play the predictions and power rankings game. But this is why I don't play this game because I just suck so hard at predictions. So I don't know, and whatever I tell you probably won't happen. So I don't want to jinx anything.
Okay, that's McKenna's very diplomatic way of obfuscating the question and just not answering it. I think we're in for a pretty interesting post-merge here. I think the numbers are all over the place. I don't think we're going to a situation necessarily where Yanu, as that decimated tribe, has control the entire time. Yes, they had control this week because they happen to all be safe in the way that this Mergatory works. All 3 of them were safe, which did give them a lot of power this week. With the split tribal coming next week and everything after that, I think Yanu might be in a lot of trouble. I think there's a lot of potential for Kenzie Q and Tiffany to really go far in this game, but it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate these next couple of weeks in order to really understand where they're sitting. But it feels more that now that a shot's been taken at Siga, it doesn't feel like more shots need to go at Siga immediately. And just with the turmoil in the Nami tribe, things can kind of get interesting moving forward.
Exactly. So let's dive into this episode with our Outwit moments. And we have decided to do our category for Outwit as groups splitting the middle. So we have Yanu in the middle of Nami and Siga trying to see which way the votes are going to land.
Yeah, and the way that things broke out in 46 is really interesting because none of the necessarily like big targets are there for this first vote.
Mhm.
All of the like big physically imposing people are safe, with most of the men. The women, and I mean, there are some very physically imposing women on this tribe, but it doesn't seem like people are really talking about them that way.
Yeah.
From what we're seeing in the edit.
Mhm.
But so that takes out like an easy way of really disrupting things. And the fact that the 6 people who were all vulnerable were split perfectly 3-3 between Siga and Nami, it really meant that Yanu just gets complete control over this, right? Like, yes, to some extent, there could be a little bit more control coming from like certain members, so that the +1 alliance, for instance, could have a lot of control in this instance. But
if Maria knew about it,
yeah, that would have helped. But the way that Yanu is positioned here, they really get to control this, and we saw Q kind of pushing it a bit when it came to the merge feast. And the fact that Siga wasn't saying a name, and that come on, you guys have to give up a name at this point. And I mean, Yanu obviously gets lucky the fact that they don't have to give up a name because none of them are vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. This setting is really interesting to have. We were going back with the 3 tribe seasons and trying to find, all right, is there a moment where there's a tribe in the middle? And there's not really a moment where there's a specific tribe in the middle, because it all gets muddied after a swap, or they go down to 2 tribes, or they start at 2 and go to 3. So there's not a lot of clear moments where there is a whole tribe in the middle. So we kind of took some liberties with our Outwit moments, and we over on the Patreon are talking co-wrong jocks versus the pretty people, and that's my moment for Outwit, is where Michelle and Julia now become the middle pairing between basically the guys and the brains, and they decide, does Nick go home, or do they keep the split on Aubrey and Debbie? And they become now this middle ground for votes, instead of what we see the episode previous in Co-Wrong, where it's brain versus brawn versus beauty, and like the brain is on the outside and the beauty and the brawn are trying to work together. But the Neil medevac happens, and then it all explodes into this beautiful episode that we are relating this episode of 46 to. So please become a patron, listen to our Co-Wrong episode. It is a fun time.
It's always fun when we get to talk about the Queen, Michelle Fitzgerald, on
yes, over here at The Specialist, we stand Michelle Fitzgerald. She is our queen. So I mean, you're obligated.
You're here. You all understand exactly what you need to do as Specialist fans when it comes to Michelle Fitzgerald. So it's really interesting in this situation because, like you said, there aren't many times where we find groups in between 2 groups. A lot of the times when we're talking about the idea of a swing vote, it's a single person, right? Someone like Sarah and Kage-an, who has that decision to make it the merge there. And we've talked about the dangers of being in that swing position, and it's a lot less dangerous when you're in a group. Other instances that I can think of just off the top of my head would be something like Denise and Malcolm essentially get this situation in Philippines. And again, we're looking at it, it's a decimated tribe. That's where we usually see it, is these decimated tribes. In the new era, the closest thing we can really get is the Tika 3, right? They have that opportunity as well come Mergatory. But when we're looking at Michelle and Julia, it's a different situation because this is essentially the merge vote. Yes, Neil's already gone since the merge, but because of the medevac, nothing really had a chance to settle in. And in fact, it's because of the Neil medevac here that we probably still have brains left in this game come the finale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's just so interesting. You know, you're gonna get more of our thoughts over on the Patreon, so I don't want to give you too much here. But I just think it's interesting how it's these two that kind of like separate and decide the vote rather than a group of them. Like Ty's not involved. I mean, the target is Nick, so like Ty's not involved totally. It's like these two are the pivotal turning points of where this vote lies.
Yeah, and it really goes to show just how well positioned Michelle and Julia were at this point in the game. Of course, Julia goes shortly after this, so not the best positioning. But I think this is also, I mean, it's the first time Michelle goes to tribal council in the season. Same with Nick, and this is the point where you start seeing Michelle as the game player come out, even though it's not terribly shown in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
This is the point where Michelle starts her journey to become the winner of this season. Is this decision here?
You highlighted it over there, but it's because it's our first tribal council.
I know. It was first tribal council again on day 22. I mentioned that in the Patreon podcast as well. But day 22, 4 more days, and it's the end of the new era. But I think what it comes down to is a lot of the times these overlooked players, and I think that's really the theme that we see with a lot of these groups that are in the middle. We highlighted it last week on the Patreon when we were talking about Timbira being at odds with each other and Jalapal kind of being that middle group that gets to decide which half of Timbira gets to succeed. But Michelle and Julia are almost so innocuous in this moment that the guys never even doubt the fact that they would just go with them. Like at least from what we see, there's a small conversation about the possibility of a women's alliance, but it's that conversation that even brings any of it to fruition at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So before we get too deep into that one, let's pivot over to your Outwit moment.
So when I'm thinking about groups in the middle, I think there's a very natural place to go, and that is a blood versus water season. And I want to really highlight San Juan del Sur, and specifically John and Jacqueline.
Let's just highlight Jacqueline.
Well, we have to highlight John too, because we're specifically talking about groups. We can't just talk about a single person here. So we have to talk about them as a pair. And this is probably the point where everyone's really sick of John and Jacqueline in this season, because this is the height of them arguing all the time. This is the moment following the Reed vote where John and Jacqueline, or this is the Reed vote where John and Jacqueline have the choice to stick with Missy Baylor and Natalie, or to work with Reed, Keith, and Alec. And really, like, this entire vote comes down to their decision. And Jacqueline's not picked for the reward, so Jacqueline's really upset and is like flopping back and forth on which way to go. John and her are just butting heads the entire time because Jacqueline just feels completely disrespected. And Jacqueline shouldn't be disrespected. She's actually one hell of a Survivor player when you get down to it.
Yes.
But this is the power that pairs have in the game, and people don't seem to realize that anymore when they're talking about Survivor. Because we talk about these big alliances, we talk about duos, and the ones that always come up, right? Like your JT and Stevens, your Denise and Malcolm. Look, these are the same people that we're talking about in these situations. These middle situations are so important in the game of Survivor. And that's why they don't come up as much, because people can't let groups have this much power like John and Jacqueline do here. They essentially decide the entire course of the game from here on out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this decision here is pivotal because they are splitting groups of Keith, Alec,
Reed.
And then Natalie, Missy, and Baylor. So it would be interesting if they went the other side, because now they're the only pair in a 5-person and could easily get dominated, versus the side that they did choose where they're not the only pair. And there is that other swing vote possibility in Natalie, where if they butter her up, she could pick them.
Yeah, and essentially this voting on Reed here allows for that moment in the following episode where Natalie gets to mistakenly cast a vote for Alec instead of Keith, right? This is, again, like we talked about how that moment...
Listen, you're stealing my moments!
No, I'm not. I wasn't getting there yet. McKenna, give me a second. I was saving it, I promise. But we talked about how Michelle and Julia, and that moment in the middle is what determined Michelle, set Michelle on her winning path. This decision from John and Jacqueline is what sets Natalie on her winning path. And I think that's the biggest thing that we can take from these moments where a group is in the middle of the game. None of these three Janus could make it to the end of the game. The decision they made today to take away the power that Siga had as a 5-strong going into a merge situation will determine who wins this game.
Yeah, exactly. Because, it makes them have to now fight for Janus or fight for Namis to take out Janus, or, any of that. They're now in a fight mode to try and get more numbers, where I think Nami feels a little bit safer because they think they have the Yanu numbers.
Yeah, and I actually think Nami's disjointedness helps them in this situation, or at least gives them the perception of it helping them, where it makes more sense for Yanu from a logical perspective to work with Nami, because if Nami is disjointed, you don't have to worry about them picking you off later. It's really going to be interesting to see how Yanu proceeds here, and if these three are the king and queen makers of this season, or if they're getting the crown themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I agree, and I just want to say Jacqueline deserved better, but so let's go into our outplay moment for this episode, and we are talking the odd one out. So Tiffany picks the wrong rock, right rock, wrong rock. I don't know, the not purple or orange rock. And she has to sit out and bet on a team to win. So we are going to be talking about people who have been the odd one out in a certain event of Survivor.
Yeah, I think it's really important to make that distinction, because with what Tiffany has this very particular situation, right? She is essentially deciding whether or not she's going to be safe, but it's still not guaranteed. Yes, when you see the divides of these two groups at the beginning of this challenge, it seems pretty obvious who's going to win. But as we get to the end, and we have a bit of confirmation bias we can use here, it was a lot closer than one might think looking at these two teams off the bat. It's a different situation than what we usually get. Yes, we've had it a bit in the new era because of this Mergatory and how it works. A lot of the times when we have people betting on challenges, they are doing so at a reward challenge, not at an immunity challenge. So there isn't such high stakes on it.
Right.
But in the end, this is still someone who's left out. And while it might not seem like that big of a deal, bonding with someone through a challenge and working together in a challenge can be enough, especially when you don't know people, to bring you closer in this game.
Yeah. And it also, is all about who is the odd one out. So I'm going to go with my moment here, and that's the Michaela sit out in Game Changers. She wasn't chosen in a schoolyard pick, thus being the odd one out. And her blind rage for these people for not picking her lost her the secret advantage that was on her sit out bench. So being the odd one out sometimes can give you advantages, and you want to try and have a clear mind to see what is going on in the game. So Tiffany picking clearly more dominant side in physicality was smart, but also she picked a tribe that had Kenzie and Q, two of her allies in it. Now, depending on which earn the merge it could be, sometimes like they were able to vote, sometimes they weren't able to vote. So you want to try and be with numbers and people, and you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, Tiffany definitely made the right decision, not just from a physicality standpoint, but from like a strategic standpoint, knowing it. If she had chosen the other team to win and ends up winning tribal council, she's probably the easy boot this episode. Whereas instead, she, no matter what, it's not just a, hey, let's take out Tiffany as the only Yanu. It's, oh, well, let's take out a Yanu. And there's, it's taking your chances from 100% guaranteed to be the one going out if it's a Yanu to a 1 in 3 chance. So it's very smart here. Michaela doesn't get this option though, right? Michaela doesn't get a bet on anything. It is just like not in the challenging Game Changers, right?
Correct. And this is a really pivotal challenge because the challenge is the Suri Balance Beam challenge. And it's a bonding exercise moment for, Zeke, who swims out to help Suri. And like, it is a bonding moment for these people who are actually doing the challenge. And Michaela's just sitting there in a rage. Like it doesn't afford her that luxury of being with people in that moment because she doesn't know how the balance beam felt. She doesn't know exactly what was going on in the challenge. She only knows from watching.
And correct me if I'm wrong. This advantage in this challenge that Michaela misses because she is so angry is the steal vote that is then used to vote her out of the game.
Correct, John.
So I think what we're looking at here...
Similar consequences could have been voted out of the game.
But I think what we're really looking at here is it's the reaction of these sit-outs to the game unfolding in front of them. Because...
And I think... You finish your thought because I was going to be moving on.
Oh, okay. Because Tiffany, I think, responds really well. Obviously, like, it's really easy in a Tiffany situation. You just have to root someone on. You're rooting them on. Yes, we get fantastic reactions from Tiffany when it looks like the Orange team might actually pull this off. But in the end, it's easy for Tiffany to respond. And because the team she bet on won, she gets to respond. And this was kind of the least amount of Tiffany we've seen in an episode so far, in all honesty. I'm thinking about it in the 46. Not necessarily a bad thing for Tiffany's edit. Like,
yeah.
Could be very good that she like takes a bit of a back seat here, but still has all of this power associated with this decision. And again, like Michaela gets voted out by the advantage she misses because of her reaction to just not being chosen. And granted, I bet her watching Suri not be able to complete that balance beam, as much as like everyone really builds it up as this like big bonding moment and this moment like of triumph for Suri when she finally gets it. Man, that probably made Michaela so much more mad.
Yeah, but talk about reactions to being the odd one out. It is your moment.
It is.
And I feel like that is just one that is like chef's kiss takes the cake.
Because when it comes to like challenges and stuff, a lot of challenges are like rock draws. Random person pick, not picked out. Schoolyard picks, not picked out, or odd person out. Mine's a schoolyard pick. But I think it's one of the most unique reactions we have ever gotten to not being selected in Survivor history. And that is Lisi in Survivor Fiji when not picked during the tribe swap. And she celebrates because she thinks she's out of the game.
Yep. So now it tells everyone there that she doesn't like want to be here anymore and is happy to, but then she's like, oh, I'm still in the game, all right, like, and then she keeps going, but she's also like partly relieved that she's not there anymore.
Yeah, and it's really weird, but then she also goes to Exile Island. She finds like the clues and everything. I'm pretty sure this is a pivotal point into how the Four Horsemen end up getting the idol anyways, as Lisi ending going up here and then becoming very close to them. It's wild. It's absurd. It is absolutely one of the funniest moments in Survivor, because the disappointment when Lisi finds out she's going to exile, not because she's going to exile, has to and remember, exile in Survivor Fiji was an island full of snakes. Not a place you really want to hang out. Like, your shelter was a hut on stilts,
yeah,
up off the ground because snakes. And Lisi's not disappointed because of the snakes. She's disappointed because she's not going home. What a response to have this early in a season of Survivor.
Yeah. I mean, Lisi is also a character. I mean, one of my all-time favorite Survivor moments is her falling off the podium in the matching game, laying there for 5 seconds, and then running to go get a match.
Yeah. Lisi, underrated character. Is she great? No. But she is funny beyond all else. And she gives us these weird... Her reactions to things are so out there and so far-fetched that this is the only... I don't know when we would ever get this type of reaction to someone being left out. Because me, personally, when I'm left out in a schoolyard pick, I'm pissed. Like, why not me? Because, and I get it. There's a lot of strategy that goes into this. But, wow, to just be like, okay, I don't have to deal with these fools anymore. That is the most... It might be the most optimistic way of responding to not being picked.
Yeah, I mean, we have 2 different reactions: blind rage and overwhelming relief.
Yeah, it's wild. And it really just shows that spectrum of response we can have. Tiffany in 46, luckily, is like right in the middle. Like, there's no anger or anything. I think there's disappointment in Tiffany not being able to compete. But there's also that sense of relief of knowing,
it's out of my hands.
It's out of her hands. She doesn't have to make any decisions or anything. Or I guess she does have to make a decision. She has to decide which one of these tribes is going to win. But luckily, that was a pretty easy decision for her.
Yeah. So, moving on to our Outlast moments. Outlast, we have decided to do being on the wrong side of the vote. So Mo arrives from Tribal Council and is like, crap, Jem went home and I voted for Ben. Geez, that sucks. So we have picked some moments that are like after the vote, with this kind of like scramble in mind of, well, how do I apologize? What do I do about, my wrong vote? How do I pivot? So yeah, that's kind of where we're going for Outlast.
Yeah, I think the bigger impact, again, just like with what we were talking about with our Outplay, it's the reaction to being on the wrong side of the vote here, and being blindsided in this way where someone you were working with closely is voted out, because that is a make or break moment here. And I think we clearly saw with 46 what Mo decides to do here in staying strong with Siga despite being on the outs was a bad decision. Like, that's the only way to really put it, right? Deciding to go along with the Siga lie that, yes, it was a unanimous vote. Like, we all voted out Jem, not a big deal. And then for some reason revealing the fact that that wasn't the case at Tribal Council. It's a response, it almost feels like a fear response to the situation rather than embracing the situation and using it to your advantage.
Yeah. So talking about like this like weird navigation of votes, you brought it up already, John, spoiling
I tried not
my
to.
moment. And it is honestly one of my favorite Survivor moments. And that's Natalie after the Keith versus Alec vote. She votes on the wrong side of her alliance because she thought she could better her game using Keith, and the others did not. So she flips her vote to Alec, and Alec goes home at, the tribal council we were talking about earlier with John and Jacqueline in the middle. And we see, oh no, not that one. So one after,
one
whatever.
after. Yeah.
Anywho, numbers, math. And we see her have to like scramble now to come up with a story of why she votes for Alec. And Mo here is just like the same time, like, what do I do? I just voted for Ben. I don't know exactly how to recover from this.
Yeah. And the interesting thing when we compare this to 46, Natalie goes in and is very intentional with the way she phrases this. Like, I thought you said Alec. Like, simple mistake. Easy enough to understand, easy enough to comprehend. And because of just the innocence that Natalie puts into it, despite the intent behind the action, it's a very believable lie. It's something that could easily make sense, especially in that lead up to tribal council where things are getting really hasty and you have to decide these things and you're splitting a vote. Makes it easy. But when we look at Mo doesn't go with the easiest possible solution of saying, hey, sorry I wrote your name down, Ben. Literally everyone told me they were voting for you. And it's almost like Mo not being honest in this situation in her response to just the Siga tribe in general made it so that it just kind of compounded everything as we moved along and made it so that she had to go along with this idea that like Siga's strong at this point, because at this point you're in a lie, just keep lying.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's ways to handle votes where it's Natalie's, where it's a little bit more tactical. Mo is a little bit more frantic. And then you have yours, who's a little bit more aggressive.
Mine's much more aggressive because I decided to go with Sandra after the Rupert blindside in Pearl Islands. And I think this is one of the most egregious examples of responding to a blindside. Yes, we have ones. I think we have some very memorable moments about people copping votes at tribal council, but we don't have as memorable moments of people responding to blindsides, because a lot of the times people have that almost the Mo response of, okay, I just got to play it cool, not let anyone know that this really got to me, and play it out, see where things go. Sandra decides to just straight up confront Johnny and Burden and blows up at them. Gets the opportunities like, yeah, you know what? They voted out Rupert. They don't deserve his fish. Dumps all of his fish. And better yet,
wins the game somehow after that.
Wonderful Survivor player. But it's the fact that when they find that the fish are all dumped out and they blame Krista.
And Sandra's
just sitting there like, you know what? This is fine. Let's go with this. No one needs to know it was me.
Yeah, and she throws like one of her number one ally or her number one ally under the bus just so she could stay.
Yeah.
It's like one of the most savage moves. Well, but Pearl Islands moves that season. Like, it just is crazy to me that she is just like blows up camp, dumps the fish, blames it on Krista, gets to the end and wins.
It just goes to show you how much conviction matters in your responses to these blindsides, I think, because the difference between we are comparing Mo's response to a blindside to the response by two winners, either blindsiding people or being blindsided, and the massive difference and why those two women were capable of winning the game and Mo wasn't is just sticking with your guns. Mo is, as we see in this episode, just kind of like scrambling with it all, like trying to process everything, not taking the time to really figure out this is my best path forward at this point. And because of that, people are willing to sacrifice her because they don't see that conviction, right? If Mo comes out from this blind side, flies off the handle, sure, it's the Vibes Tribe. It could have probably gone bad, but going into a merge, that might have been the best thing possible that could have happened.
Yeah, because then they really like exile her, and then everybody knows she's on the outs instead of happy tribe.
Yeah, exactly, right? And with that, I mean, maybe a Sega doesn't go here. Maybe Venus does end up going here in 46 if that's the case. Maybe Charlie ends up going here or Maria. Like, who
Don't
knows?
you dare touch Maria.
No. I mean, Maria's like the only person whose name didn't come up as an option this week. I don't think we have to worry about Maria going.
Also,
although a
hello.
split tribal is a little concerning for someone like Maria, but she has the
That's
potential to
true.
usually win the immunity challenges that we see at a split tribal, so she might be fine.
But we talked about this we're a week ahead of the game, John,
We are.
about talking about Maria, who is like an untouchable, kind of like a Kim and a JT.
We'll see.
I-
We'll see. But I don't know. McKenna, have you ever been blindsided?
Many a time.
Yeah. I'm not going to ask you if you've committed a blindside because I know the answer to that question.
Not like a crazy amount of times. I'd say like I'd honestly say one.
That you've remained in a game.
What?
That you've remained in a game?
Oh, never have remained in a game.
Okay. So I don't know, like, how would you respond to this? If your closest ally gets blindsided out of the game, you're blindsided with them because you thought things were going their way. Are you taking a Natalie approach? Are you taking a Mo approach? I mean, we can't even forget, Natalie did get blindsided earlier in San Juan del Sur when Jeremy gets out, and she swears a vengeance on John for it and just like bides her time. And this is part of her big plan, is screwing up this vote in order to make it so that John loses all of his power in the game.
So, I mean, I play a bunch of live games, and it sometimes comes down to who you know. And I voted wrong the first tribal council we went to, and I went up to the guy who I voted for and literally was like, "Hey, I voted for you because I don't want it to like come out from somewhere else." He never really trusted me after that, and then I went home a few votes later.
So if you were prompted with that situation again, how would you approach it? Would you tell them? Would you keep that information secret? Is it dependent on the person?
I don't know. It's the trick. Like, I don't think there is a right answer here. I think it's all about how the other person receives any form of information about that. If they are like, okay, great, they came to me and told me and didn't lie to me in the subsequent votes after that, or they take it as like, I'm going to keep my eye on them, but you know, they trusted me enough to like tell me afterwards. It just all depends on how I think the other person takes it. Like, I don't think Ben took it terribly because that's part of the game. You have to put someone's name on paper, and if she didn't get something else, like, clearly other people in the tribe were throwing Ben's name out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know
So, like,
that because we're
granted,
the
like,
audience, and we get that limited
Mo
omniscience
should have
view of
been
it.
like, "Hey, I heard your name from X, Y, and Z. This is why I voted for you," to take that target a little bit off of her back. Similar to like where Natalie was like, "I thought you guys said this."
Yeah.
And not, you know, "I thought you said vote Alec, not Keith." And so I got confused. So if she had just taken a little bit of that approach where, you know, this is information that I have in the game that I'm willing to give to you, to try and bring that bridge and trust back.
Yeah, because the big thing is Mo does kind of own the fact that she voted for Ben. Like, she's like, "Hey, Ben, yeah, it was me. I'm sorry." And unfortunately, the way it looks, I mean, Mo was on the outs of this group anyways at that point because obviously she's left out of this vote. But her response could have made it so that they would be a little more willing to fight for her, because that's what my interpretation of this episode of 46 is. And we did see it from Tim's confessional very early in the episode of like, if we have to sacrifice someone, it'll be Mo. if Mo puts up a bit of a fight here, it's like, hey, why'd you guys do that to me? Why'd you leave me out? Like, even just questioning Siga on it, they might fight for her more because they see her as more than just, oh, you're a number for us.
Yeah. So, I enjoyed this episode of Survivor. It was good, and I'm looking forward to this next episode to see what it brings and what we can connect things to.
Yeah, I'm really excited for where we're going. It's a split tribal, so things might get a little wonky. We have very limited split tribals to reference, so hopefully something happens that's more distinct, so we don't have to reference one of them again.
Yeah.
But I'm really looking forward to it because I think we have this really great cast of characters here, and I think that was really showcased in this week's episode. I think we really have an opportunity to really showcase these players moving forward and how they're playing the game, especially these Nami players who we haven't had that chance to really see play. At this point, what they did this week was pretty obvious, right? Like obviously they want to get a Siga member out because they want to have those numbers, but Venus is still on the outs, and that could really cause some complications moving forward.
Yeah. Well, John, this has been an exciting podcast. So if you guys have not listened to our podcast over on the Patreon, please go do that. We are watching Jocks versus the Pretty People, episode 8 of Ko-Rong, the Nick boot.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's a fantastic episode of Survivor. It really kind of showcases why Ko-Rong's such a great season. Has a lot of really like personal moments that really make you adore that cast, in my opinion.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, John, what's going on in the Specialist Universe?
Well, after everyone likes the video and subscribes to the channel, they can find out that Phil and Will, if you haven't caught their recap from Wednesday night, they did that. Phil had been coming right off of the watch party at the Ron Clark Academy and couldn't stop talking about it. He really talked that up. I want to go to a Ron Clark viewing party now. It sounded like a sweet time. And because of that, there was no digging deeper this week. But McKenna and Phil recapped, what is it, episode 3 of The Amazing Race yesterday? I
believe so. Maybe it's 4.
Oh, okay.
That's my one thing. I always lose track of episode numbers.
Okay. This Sunday.
Episode 4.
Okay. This Sunday, Phil and Will be joined by the one and only Johnny Fairplay for the predictions of Power Rankings. That should be a really fun podcast. I imagine that will be a very good time. So make sure you tune in for that one. On Monday, Phil and I are continuing. You haven't seen that as the cinema specialist. This week, we are talking about John Wick and the 1992 John Woo film, Hard Boiled. That's going to be really fun. We don't get an option to talk about action flicks a lot. So getting to dive into those two is going to be a blast. Tuesday, Phil and Will are going to be back with Deal or No Deal Island and the recap of that. Wednesday, of course, after the episode, you're going to see Phil and Will talking recap. And the Phil and Will show should also be coming out on Wednesday. Thursday, there should be a new episode of Digging Deeper. And Phil and McKenna are going to be back recapping the next episode of The Amazing Race. And then you can join us here again next Friday as we get to talk about what fun we get out of this split tribal council.
Exactly. All right, everyone. We will see you next week or over on the Patreon.